Hello, welcome to the Module 2 overview for Professionalizing Feminisms, our course WST 591. So in the previous module, Module 1, you learned definitions, right? You got some insights into why there are scholarly and practitioner critiques of the ways in which we engage in social change, social justice, and social transformation. So in Module 1, you defined nonprofits, you defined NGOs, you defined activism, you began to clarify the role of nonprofits within social movements in the US. In Module 2, you're really delving into the unrealized possibilities and the limitations and roadblocks that nonprofits experience and that nonprofits themselves put up. So Module 2 really explores how organizing is hard. Organizing is difficult. Organizing is difficult whether you're organizing in a formal setting, like through a nonprofit, or whether you're organizing in a more radical setting, activist setting, right? For example, organizing a street-based protest, organizing a vigil, organizing a sit-in, right? Organizing is hard. Organizing is hard because, for many reasons. One is that you are drawing attention to a problem, an issue with the status quo. Right? When you're organizing, you're often drawing attention to something that is unfair, unequal, unequitable, something that is violent, something that is harmful. Right? Organizing usually means that you're upsetting the status quo, and that means you're being a killjoy. This is why you read a chapter from the Feminist Killjoy Handbook each week so that you can explore the radical potential of getting in the way, because that's what organizing is. You are getting in the way. Right? You're a squeaky wheel. You're pointing out something that potentially requires intervention, potentially reform, potentially eradication, right? Potentially something new in its place. So as you're reading about nonprofits, and you're reading about something called the nonprofit industrial complex. And this phrasing might be phrasing that you are familiar with, maybe having taken classes that have interrogated the military industrial complex in the US. For the purpose of our course, understand that in industrial complex, there are additional meanings that you will find in the reading, but that an industrial complex refers to the ways that a particular industry does not stand on its own, that multiple industries and other power actors often are working together in order to maintain something, right? So the military industrial complex, we're not just talking about, say, the military, but multiple offices and engagements with government, multiple perhaps nonprofits. We're talking about educational settings, right? The military often comes into high schools and colleges in order to recruit, right? There are multiple actors at play in order to make up this industrial complex. Okay? So pay attention to and make sure that you're defining the nonprofit industrial complex in your readings. Honestly, you will probably come across multiple definitions. The original definition of nonprofit industrial complex came from a group of people who were organizing. They referred to themselves as Insight, Women of Color Against Violence. Insight, Women of Color Against Violence, also co-authored a book, co-edited a book. They are scholars and practitioners who have and continue to be involved in feminist advocacy, racial justice advocacy, abolitionist advocacy within the US and elsewhere. And so you will learn more about the nonprofit industrial complex as you're reading. Neoliberalism honestly has many meanings, and so I encourage you to create your own robust definition as you work through the readings this week, as you look stuff up online, as you engage with this video. Neoliberalism, it refers to a philosophy, a guiding principle that believes that capitalist market forces and the government, right, work together to ensure that there's a free market economy, that it tends to push privatization. For example, privatizing schools like K through 12, like we've seen a lot of in the US, privatizing firefighters, right? So for example, the very wealthy people in California had their own private firefighters to call on when their homes caught on fire, separate from the public firefighters who were available to all of us if we call 911. So neoliberalism, right, sort of this way of setting up society. Neoliberalism then says, well, see, it's okay because we do have a bit of a welfare state in order to help support individuals. And so there is a belief in democracy that goes along with neoliberalism. There is a belief in some sort of structure of a safety net that goes along with neoliberalism. So if we're talking about organizing, we're talking about nonprofits, right? One main area of feminist theorizing is that for us, we understand and center difference. We are not here to say, like, oh, we share in this struggle, ergo, we are working together. It becomes, no, I see you in your struggle, which is different than my struggle, but our struggles are probably linked politically, socially, economically, legally. And so if we work together, that will strengthen our ability in order to affect actual structural change. Okay? So feminist coalition, you will come across this phrasing, feminist coalition is seen as separate from, different from institutionally driven organizing because it is rooted in difference and because it's rooted in pain. And I want you to pay attention to how our scholar this week is theorizing pain as a motivating factor, but also as a really important variable in organizing, right? And so feminist coalition, it's focused on difference. It's focused on pain, which means it's focused on recognizing difference. It's focused on acknowledging pain, right? And so what this means is that we're also not focused on individuals. This is about community. This is about social structure. These are about social populations, right? Because when we come to just individuals, right, an individual may have successes and failures. When we look at individuals as a group, then we start to see patterns. And those are patterns that we may want to interrupt or patterns that we may want to continue, but we don't know until we can identify them. And that's what feminist coalition building is really all about. It's rooted in not shared oppression, but in difference. Right? Further, all of your readings this week and last week as well in these modules, they're focused on power. So you are in a women in gender and sexuality studies discipline. You're in our master's level course, right? This is all a critique of power. And power flows. Power is not, power doesn't sit. Power is not static. Power can be top down, right? Authority is a form of power. Listening to your teachers or to your parents, that's a form of power. Stopping at a red light because it turned red, that's a form of power. Turning in your taxes because you don't want to get in trouble for tax fraud, that's a form of power. Power also comes from the bottom up, okay? Students organizing walkouts of their classes, that is power. Some people refuse to pay their taxes, that is also power. Power is something that you cannot see, but it is something that you can see the consequences and implications of. And so scholars and practitioners are very, very interested in studying and understanding power. And so when we say things like organizing, what are we organizing for? We're organizing people power. We're organizing people power in order to engage in other forms of power, in order to speak back against some other level of authoritative power, violent power, right? So you're going to read excerpts from a special issue from the Scholar and Feminist Online, which is a scholarly journal, academic journal. And so you're going to read excerpts from a special issue that's almost 10 years old now. And this was a special issue on navigating neoliberalism, nonprofits, the academy, and beyond. Now, as you read this, you're going to come across multiple definitions of neoliberalism, and you're also going to come across, and I want you to challenge yourself and see if you can, identify the characteristics of neoliberalism that these articles and videos portray, because they're not going to say characteristic number 1, characteristic number 2, characteristic number 3. You will do that as you make your notes, okay? And so thinking through the ways in which, again, this is almost 10 years old, We, at that point, were still very much a neoliberal country, but that has really changed. And because we no longer are focused on social safety nets, because the idea of nonprofits as providing a social good is under attack. And so I encourage you as you read to, note things that feel familiar and also note things that don't feel as familiar, because we are in a different social moment. And it's actually really amazing because you were living through this social moment. So this is up to you to theorize this social moment as we move from neoliberalism to something else. Module 2 explores the idea of non-profitization, which is a political logic, an ideology, a guiding principle, whereby a state displaces social responsibilities to civilians who then engage in processes to undertake those responsibilities, including the formation of nonprofits. Yet, as you will learn through some real-world examples, the nonprofit industrial complex in the US has evolved into an arm of social control in collusion with the state. This means that US nonprofits are embedded in neoliberal gender and racial formations. However, individuals within nonprofits can and are challenging the limitations of the nonprofit industrial complex and envisioning new feminist futures. So use these guiding questions to help organize your note-taking and go through each of the tabs here. Remember, do not click next yet, because you have to go up through the tabs, right? So don't click next. Make sure you're coming up here. Module 2, what to read, watch, and hear. And then I have my 3 tabs again. So your first tab will be the feminist killjoy professional development reading. Again, the hyperlink takes you to the book's general page, and then you can click to get to the chapter that you're looking for. Or you can simply click here and it'll take you to it. It does take time to load, right? Many of you have probably noticed with ASU's e-readings, they often take some time, so give that some time. Now, once you're here, please do, again, there's only you can only have 3 people on here at one time, so I encourage you to download it, borrow for, I would say as long as you need to. You have to have Adobe Digital Editions installed. And now you have it. Oh, it'll take some time. Then I'm asking you to read more about the nonprofit context. There's multiple links here. It takes you to the Scholar and Feminist Online. This was a special issue. So this tells you a little bit about the issue, right? Why they created it. This is a particular piece from the issue that I wanted you to engage in. And then they also provided a little bit of background here, and then I believe 6 different videos. I encourage you to watch all of them. They're about 4 to 6 minutes each. If you can't get to all of them, then I would say, pick 3 that feel the most relevant to you. Remembering that here we're trying to understand neoliberalism. We're trying to understand the nonprofit industrial complex, right? And we're doing so because we are trying to then understand, come back over here, social transformation, right? And so these are very academic readings. Both of these come from traditional academic journals. So these are going to be longer. They're going to have background information. They're going to have analysis. There's going to be conclusions. When you click on the colluding with and resisting the state, organizing against gender violence in the US, it brings up a PDF. You can download it if you so desire. You can make it big here. Whatever makes sense to you for your process. And as you read these, pay attention to the title and the subheadings, right? Colluding with and resisting the state. Who's colluding with the state? Who's resisting the state? How, right? What does that mean? Battering is a social problem. You're telling me that battering wasn't always seen as a social problem, right? Pay attention to the bolded subheadings. Let them guide you. Let them inform your understanding. One thing that, this is just me, but something I like to do whenever I start reading an academic article is that I first go to their conclusion or to their last bolded subheading. So, okay, so where we are now, where we want to go, this is their conclusion. So I would probably start here first. And that's just how my brain works, because that'll help me then understand what they mean with all the background information that they're building throughout the article. Similarly, stop thinking properly, feminist activism and coalescing with history. Stop thinking properly. Who should stop thinking properly, or who is stopping thinking properly? Is this a call to action? Is this a warning, right? Why is Dr. Boyd phrasing her article title this way, right? Again, pay attention to the title itself. And as you read, if it feels really long, that's okay. Take breaks. Maybe read that first section and then come back. Pay attention again to the bolded subheadings: nonprofits, NGOs, and neoliberal feminist coalition, because they all go together, because they're doing different things, right? What is the point that Dr. Boyd is making in this particular section? Right? She's referring to literature as well as, right, this real world example of the self-defense nonprofit Home Alive, right? Or at least the self-defense organization Home Alive, and then the sort of push-pull with this idea of institutionalization through being a nonprofit, right? The non-profitization of social care. So this is a really powerful example of that. See if you can identify the ways in which money is a form of power, right? Learn more about, how do I say it? I was very surprised when I learned about foundations and what foundations actually do. And, let me be clear, I'm someone who tries to get funding from foundations. So these are critiques that we make of how the social world works, because we want the social world to do better, to be better, right? This is why Dr. Boyd encourages us to stop thinking properly, right? That was her phrasing, to stop thinking properly. Why does she want us to stop thinking properly? That's a really evocative thing to say, particularly in scholarly settings. So what is it that Dr. Boyd is encouraging us to do when she says that, right? What is it about colluding with the state? I mean, that again is another very powerful phrase, right? Colluding with and resisting the state. Why is it that Dr. Ritchie and her co-authors, right, are talking about organizing against gender violence in the US with this really critical eye, right? And just to give you a little background there for that particular article, rape crisis centers, domestic violence shelters, these are fairly new historically in the United States. And feminists, activists, and scholars fought very hard for domestic violence and sexual assault to be recognized as social problems, and to be recognized as not just, oh, that's a tiff between man and wife. And I do mean man and wife because this was very, very, very heteronormative. And also we know that in heterosexual relationships, right, those are very dangerous for the woman because there are such high rates of domestic violence, particularly domestic violence, homicide, suicide, domestic violence causing severe injury and long-lasting harm. So we live in an era where rape crisis centers, domestic violence shelters are normal. But that wasn't always the case. And it was really through the 70s and 80s, through a lot of hard work and organizing, formally, I would say, but also very much non-institutionally driven organizing. And what ended up happening in the US is that we passed the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, in, I believe, 1994. You can double check me on that. And when VAWA passed, that is then what allowed rape crisis centers, domestic violence shelters to become institutionalized even more so, perhaps to grow in number, because that is who you would apply to get grant funding, right? So it was a way for the government to say, yes, we recognize this as a social problem, and here we will provide monies, funding, to nonprofits that are addressing these issues, right? That are providing social supports, that are trying to stop violence before it's happening. When we talk about things like an industrial complex, this is also a good example of what we mean, because then when police are called, you're often roped into being what they call systems involved. Sometimes then being roped into what some scholars refer to as a criminal justice social services alliance. And it makes it very hard to then break out of that labeling and break out of being systems involved once you already are. And so this is why Ritchie and her co-authors are studying the collusion of the state, right, with anti-violence advocacy. The collusion of those of us who say, well, we want people to be safe, and the way to safety is through incarceration of people who are violent. That may not actually be the best response to violence for a variety of reasons. And in the US, we know that we are a country that incarcerates at incredibly high rates. We are one of the most carceral countries in the entire world. We jail people way more and imprison people way more often than other countries, particularly countries that we like to compare ourselves to, right? And so, you know, Angela Davis is a very well-known feminist scholar, and, you know, she argues that prisons disappear people, right? Not social problems. But yet, incarceration is our answer to social problems. Right? Loitering, you're arrested. Drug use, you're arrested. Sex work, you're arrested. Sex trafficking victim, you're still arrested as the first line of engagement, which is something I know because of the work that I do, right? Involvement of the carceral state is not a path towards safety or well-being for individuals or for communities, particularly communities of color. Real quick, I just wanted to talk again a little bit about AI. I know AI is an amazing tool and it's out there. I've spoken a bit about AI, or at least written a bit in our Canvas module about AI and being wary of it for your writing. I also encourage you to be wary of using AI to summarize your readings. So there are AI models out there where you could say potentially feed in a academic journal article and then it'll summarize it for you. It's not helpful. I've tried it just to see how that works. The point of summarizing an article is so that you learn what the article is about. So if you have a machine do that for you or a tool do that for you, then you aren't learning. Let's say it that way. Just, you know, use your brains to try to come up with this information. Use your critical eye to examine what it is that you're reading and to come up with your own questions after you're done reading, right? When you're reading these pieces, they should leave you with questions that we will hopefully answer in future modules. These are readings that build on each other. If you do have questions, feel free to throw them up in the community help forum. If you have very specific individualizing questions that you know, something personal, feel free to reach out to me individually. Thank you again for watching this. Thank you for engaging, and I look forward to engaging with your work online. Thank you so much.